Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Thursday and Week 15 is actually kicking off tonight. We will be looking at the full Week 15 slate to get you ready for what should be the first week of the fantasy playoffs for most everyone. And that begins with tonight's game. We looked at it a little bit when we were with you on Tuesday. Since then, Keenan Allen's been ruled out. Josh Palmer coming back. Justin Herbert done for the year with his finger surgery, and Josh Jacobs is tracking to miss. So heck of a game as the Chargers meet the Raiders. I picked the Raiders on Tuesday. I'm going to stick with that, but for fantasy, this has got to be our nightmare, right?
Who did I pick on Tuesday? Did I pick the?
You picked the Chargers because you were all in on Easton Stick, but
I'm gonna stick with my pick.
I mean, it's not like either team makes an incredibly compelling case since each team is missing a couple of their best players.
Well, and there's some talk that O'Connell's going to be on a short leash this week, that Jimmy G could be getting back in. You know, if Josh Jacobs is out, I think we've seen enough of Zamir White to know that if Josh Jacobs is out, they're probably going to throw the ball a lot. Whether they should or not is a whole nother question. But it seems like that's what they're going to do. The Chargers get Josh Palmer back. Gerald Everett is going to be a thing. And we saw last week, even though it was only a couple plays, Easton Stick and Quentin Johnston seemed to have ever so slight a connection. So, you know, somebody's got to win pick.
Yeah, and the inactive should officially post here about halfway through the show, so I will keep an eye out, and I will make sure to bring that up when we get to it. We're going to look at the Week 15 slate. There are 3 Saturday games. This is the first week of the fantasy playoffs, so you're basically looking at the key lineup questions, and that's what we're going to try to focus on as we go through these. First of the Saturday games sees the 7-6 Minnesota Vikings at the 7-6 Cincinnati Bengals. We know Nick Mullins is going to be the starter. Jaron Hall is going to be his backup. Josh Dobbs is the emergency quarterback now. But the bigger question probably for fantasy players is Justin Jefferson. We were thrilled to get him back last week. That did not last long. He ended up going to the hospital with a chest injury. But he's questionable, and they said tracking to play. How are you feeling about Justin Jefferson, Dennis?
Well, I'm clearly going to be a little bit nervous. I know the Vikings have a winning record, but it doesn't seem like they're trending to finish the season like that. So at any given time, you know, if he's banged up, they might shut him down. He was talking in the press a little bit this week saying, you know, it was a weird hit, a hard hit. They needed to make sure that there was nothing going on internally just because of the way it happened. It feels like he's getting comfortable with being sore this week, and then they'll give him enough pain medicine so that he doesn't feel the soreness during the game. You know, they're going with Nick Mullins at quarterback. He started 8 games in 2018 and 8 games in 2020. Didn't have a great record. Now, I get it. You know, the stat nerds are going to tell us that QB wins isn't a legitimate stat, but, you know, he was like, I think it was something like 5-11 or something in 16 starts over those 2 seasons. But he had a YPA of 8.3 in 2018, 7.5 in 2020. So that's a respectable YPA. plus 64% completion rate in each of those seasons. The concerning part was he had a 25-22 touchdown to interception ratio. So that's really the concerning part. It seems like he's willing to try to make plays, but he's not great at protecting the ball.
And no Madison in this one, so they would really like a robust passing game. For the Bengals, we've seen Chase Brown get.
I've got one league where I really could use a robust Ty Chandler game.
She'll see. For the Bengals, we've seen Chase Brown involved quite a bit the last couple of weeks. How are you feeling about that backfield with him and Joe Mixon?
He's added something to the mix that just hasn't been there all season. Travion Henderson couldn't provide it. Chris Evans couldn't provide it. And Mixon certainly can't provide it at this stage of his career, and that's explosion. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. He gets out and he's making plays. The downside of it is Mixon is still the guy. And let's make no mistake about it. Mixon is RB6 on the season. He's got a great floor. He's going to get the goal line work. He's a good pass catcher. Brown is RB19 over the last 2 weeks. He showed that he can make plays. He got the 54-yard touchdown reception. He has a couple nice runs. So with the Vikings giving up the third fewest fantasy points to running backs, it makes me a little bit nervous, but they do give up the seventh most receptions to running back. So I could see Mixon and Chase Brown being a little bit closer in scoring this week just because of what Brown has done in the passing game over the last couple weeks. Mixon is steady. He's going to do the right thing. He's the better pass protector of the two. Now, he's not a world beater at pass protection by any means. That's why Samaje Perine played so much last year. But Mixon is better than Chase Brown.
I am taking the Vikings in this one.
I'm going Bengals.
Next up, we have the 7-4 Pittsburgh Steelers at the 7-6 Pittsburgh Steelers. I forget how many games there have been played at the 7-6 Indianapolis Colts. Kenny Pickett has been ruled out again. We're getting Mitch Trubisky. Ever since they fired Matt Canada, we've been excited to see an uptick in offense for Pittsburgh, but it hasn't really consistently happened. They have Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth that you would theoretically be interested in. How are you feeling about those guys?
So the Colts give up the fourth most fantasy points to running backs. So I'm expecting a nice game out of Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. But since they've gotten rid of Matt Canada, it's really swung back towards Najee Harris. So I like Harris. They give up the fifth most rush yards, the Colts that is, and the second most touchdowns to running backs. So it feels like Pittsburgh will be able to grind the ball out and really – control the ball against the Colts. Colts are the bottom half versus wide receivers and fantasy points. So it just screams start your Pittsburgh running backs. And the Colts also are weak versus tight ends. We saw 2 weeks ago, I think it was, Freiermuth had a 9-catch game. Last week, not so much. But this feels like a good game for not the wide receivers.
For the Colts, Jonathan Taylor out again. You're starting Michael Pittman. He's been solid gold. How are you feeling about Moss and any other receivers?
I'm kind of out on Zach Moss, but the Steelers' defense is susceptible to running backs. It just Moss, who had a great beginning to the season, after Taylor went down again with the second injury, it just seems like Moss can't get untracked. Minshew, he's playing okay. I think he's quarterback 18 since he took over. That's okay for Superflex. It's not going to win you titles in 1 QB leagues. It's not even streamer worthy. Outside of Pittman, I think anything else is a gamble.
I agree, but I am still taking the Colts in this one.
So am I.
A lot of playoff implications for the AFC in all of these games, really. The nightcap on Saturday, probably the best game of the day. The 7-6 Broncos, who are 6-1 in their last. I mean, I think for everyone, it could be a good matchup. At the 9-4 Detroit Lions, Dennis, we love Cortland Sutton this season. You're probably playing Javonte Williams. A lot of people have been trying, much like they tried to make Fetch happen. They're trying to make Jerry Jeudy happen, and you know what? It just hasn't happened. In a week like this, any tendency to throw him in a lineup?
He's a desperate flex play. He hasn't been consistent at all. He's had hands like, MVS going on out there. Just 4 of 12 games in double-digit fantasy points. He's averaging 8.2 PPR fantasy points on the season. It's just so hard to trust. And in the playoffs, that's not where you want to be.
For the Lions, you feel pretty good about Amon-Ra and Laporta and the two backs, especially because Denver has been a little susceptible against the run. But how are you feeling about Jameson Williams? We were excited when he got drafted, but we just haven't seen a lot of pop yet. Are you taking a chance this week?
I would beg to differ. I would say all we've seen is pop. That's like one play per game. That's
all right. We haven't seen consistent pop.
It's a growing year. I get you. You're like, oh, well, it's his second season. He was there last year. He was injured most of last year. He came on and played, I think, the last game. He's dealt with some injuries this year. He hasn't had a chance to really get untracked. And then when he did get to where he was starting to get consistent playing time, Jared Goff kind of took a dive. And so things weren't great on that end of the ball. I like Jameson Williams, and I think he's a buy low candidate, but you have to recognize that he may bust. I mean, we might be looking at the next Gabe Davis is what it may be. He could have games where, he catches 4 or 5 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown, and then much like Davis, who I'll touch on later, it could be, a real roller coaster. I think it'll be a big day for Gibbs and Montgomery and Laporta.
Hopefully not too big a day. I'm taking the Broncos.
Taking the Lions. Grudge match.
As you should. Next up, we kick off the Sunday schedule of the 6-7 Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the 6-7 Green Bay Packers. Dennis, in an all-important final regular season game, Mike Evans, 1 catch for 8 yards on 6 targets. But prior to that, he had been Baker Mayfield's homeboy this season. As we come into the fantasy playoffs, are you expecting a big bounce back? You still playing Mike Evans with confidence?
I think you have to play Mike Evans with confidence. He's just shown so much over the course of the season. At least 4 receptions in 10 of 13 games. He's getting in the end zone. But would it surprise anybody for the Bucks to go, hey, we got you your 1,000 yards. Now we're going to take care of Chris Godwin because, he's probably the one that's still going to be here next year. Yeah, I just don't know that Baker can support 2 high-end wide receivers consistently, especially the way that Rachaad White has been playing, and Baker dumps the ball off mercilessly to White. It's
well, we saw last week against the Giants, Saquon was a huge factor, so that's got to be good news if you're rostering White.
I know. I tried to trade for him earlier
Green
this
Bay
week.
Couldn't stop you in the run game, so.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think Evans is going to be just fine. If you're rostering him, you got to have quite the stable of wide receivers if you're going to sit him.
Meanwhile, the Green Bay Packers are starting to resemble a MASH unit. Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed, questionable with ankle injuries, neither really practicing. A.J. Dillon, questionable. Aaron Jones has been perpetually questionable. Christian Watson, still questionable and not practicing with his hamstring injury. How are you feeling about the Packers for fantasy?
Dillon, I guess it's come out that he broke his thumb, and so now he's trying to figure out, can he wrap it?
Seems important for a running back.
Yeah. They put it in the other hand, takes away your stiff arm maybe because you got a club. Love has been playing great. He's QB9 on the season. He adds a little bit of mobility to the game. Reed, wide receiver 31. I thought Reed may come on next year and overtake Dobbs, but he's done it this year. Dobbs is wide receiver 36, and honestly, for Dobbs to be anywhere above the wide receiver 3-4, Reed and Watson need to be hampered. And Tucker Kraft has played well. He's tight end 11 in the last 4 games. Musgrave was playing well before that. He just hasn't made it back yet. So there are guys that if they're playing, I'm okay to start them. Dobbs, Reed, Kraft. I don't think any of them are elite options, but they're definitely flex worthy and streamer worthy at the tight end position.
I'm taking the Buccaneers to hold on to first in the NFC South.
I'm taking chaos in the Packers.
Next up, we have the 5-8 New York Giants at the 9-4 Miami Dolphins. Dennis, last week in his return to the starting lineup, Zach Wilson threw for more than 300 yards, while at the same time, the Dolphins allowed Will Levis to throw for more than 300 yards. So are you saying there's chance for Zach Wilson in a putrid quarterback landscape in the playoffs?
No, I am not. The Dolphins have the 4th highest pressure rate, 39.7%, and Wilson is terrible under pressure. Levis, I think, held up very well, and I think Levis is a better runner. Levis is stronger than Zach Wilson. So the Texans have the 12th highest pressure rate. So we saw what the Jets did to the Texans last week, and the Dolphins' pressure rate is higher than the Texans. The Dolphins are 3rd in sacks with 42. The Texans are 22nd with 31. The Dolphins give up the 6th fewest receptions to running backs. So Breece Hall might not even be a bunch of help for Zach Wilson. It does not look good for Zach Wilson.
Yeah, it doesn't look good for a lot of us in Superflex because your options at quarterback are getting grimmer. Because even guys you might like, which we'll talk about later, like a Kyler Murray going against the 49ers defense, I don't have incredibly high hopes, or Sam Howell. For the Dolphins, Tyreek Hill hurt his ankle. We saw it keep him out a lot Monday night. He's still not really practicing, but they think he's probably going to play. Does that give you any trepidation in fantasy? I'm figuring you pretty much got to throw him out, right?
If he's starting, you got to play him. I mean, you just can't take the risk, but the offense is not the same without him. Waddle doesn't provide that same threat that Hill does. It's not that Waddle is a bad player. I think Waddle is a very, very good NFL wide receiver. But the way the offense is built around what Tyreek Hill can do, and in conjunction with Waddle and Tua and those running backs, without Hill, it doesn't work as well. I mean, and going against the Jets, I got to tell you, I've got a 1 quarterback league where my choices were Tua and Josh Dobbs, and I went ahead and picked up Nick Mullins, and I'm considering starting Mullins in the playoffs. And if Tua doesn't go, it actually becomes a fairly easy decision for me.
Yeah, it looked like he was tracking to play. Didn't look like he will likely miss.
But I mean, we saw him come back, and it'll be a week later. And how effective is he going to be with the ankle?
Tua's not even on the injury report.
Oh, I was thinking Hill is who I was thinking.
Oh, Hill. You mean if Hill doesn't go? Yeah.
The other thing is Miami lost their center. Their offensive line has been struggling. Yeah. They struggled after their center went out, and that was without the Titans' best defensive lineman, Jeffrey Simmons, playing.
And it's another week where Achane and Mostert have not been practicing. I would expect one or both of them to still play. I am taking the Dolphins.
I'm still taking the Dolphins too.
Where there's a will, there's a way, except for last week. The 8-5 reeling Kansas City Chiefs are at the 3-10 New England Patriots. Dennis, Isaiah Pacheco did not play last week, hasn't practiced this week, officially listed as questionable. But how are you feeling as the game approaches?
Not great, Bob. Not great. I mean,
I'm not happy about his replacements either.
No, there's no you have to turn elsewhere. You're not going to get enough out of CEH or Jerick McKinnon, and not having him hampers Patrick Mahomes in the passing game too. And so as much as I want there to be, I want Mahomes to be able to carry that team and will it to victory. Against good teams, he's just not able to. Kelsey is, I don't know if lost a step is the right word, but he's not playing as well as he has in the past. And while Rashee Rice is coming on, I don't think he's established himself quite yet as the difference maker. Isaiah Pacheco is he's the heart and soul of that offense, even though he doesn't get near as much work as he would on almost any other team in the NFL. He just, there's something about having him on the field that provides a sort of balance to that team that the other backs can't do.
Meanwhile, it looks like we may be without Ramondre Stevenson again. He's officially questionable, but also still not practicing. Could see more Ezekiel Elliott. But I want to ask you, the big news for New England is the report
that RB1 Ezekiel Elliott.
The big news for New England that came out this week is that they've already decided to move on from Bill Belichick, and he will no longer be with the team next year. It's been bandied about every day. They even asked Bill at his press conferences, A, do you think that's true? And B, how much do you think those swirling rumors are affecting the team?
So it's Tom Curran that's doing the reporting, and he's pretty plugged in New England. And so I think if he's reporting it, I feel like it's probably what's going to happen. I get that, they're not going anywhere this year, and so there's no real reason for Kraft to humiliate him and can him during the season. But it just seems that his whole once Brady left, I think he outcoached himself with the whole Matt Patricia, Joe Judge offensive coordinator tandem. And he just hasn't been able to recover. He's 71.
Well, they ruined Mac Jones. You forget almost that 2 years ago, he looked like the best of those rookie quarterbacks and led the team into the playoffs.
Belichick is 71, and I think he can coach for several more seasons. I don't think he's I just don't know if the game has passed him by.
You don't see him as a big media personality with that, real warm.
It almost feels like if he could go somewhere and just be the defensive coordinator again, that he would put together a defense that would be the best in the league, and then you let somebody else, be the face of the franchise on the offensive side of the ball.
It's hard to imagine after this many years and that much success, seeing him go back to being a coordinator role. I do agree with you. I think he probably will end up being out. I almost feel like he may, at the bare minimum, want to take a year off.
He keeps getting linked to Washington.
God. R.I.P. Sam Howell. I'm going to take the Chiefs.
So am I.
Washington traded all their good defensive players, too. I mean, Merry Christmas. Next up, the 5-8 Bears at the 8-5 Cleveland Browns. Dennis, is the Bears backfield just a complete avoid right now?
Oh, I'll tell you, I got to take the L because I thought for sure last week that Foreman was going to be the odd man out.
And apparently he's the stud.
He 55% of the snaps. Johnson had 28% and Herbert had 17%. Foreman dominated the touches with 14. Johnson had 1 carry, no targets. And Khalil Herbert had 3 carries. So I don't know if it's going to, if they're going to play running back roulette and it'll be somebody else this week, but it sure feels like they're going to let Foreman be the lead back of this committee.
Meanwhile, for the Browns, Joe Flacco officially signed to the active roster. We expect him to start going out. Is this a good thing for the passing game assets for the Browns?
The initial gut reaction is yes, but I mean, he only completed 55% of his passes. It's not like he was setting the league on fire, and his career average is only 61%. So he's not one of these. He's not one of these high completion percentage quarterbacks. He's getting the ball to the right guys, and Cooper, Njoku, Moore, and Ford. That you want to see. And he's not going to run the ball. So the Bears give up the third most touchdowns, but get the third most passing touchdowns, but get the second most interceptions. And they also get the second fewest sacks. So I think he'll have time to throw. He's just going to have to make good decisions because the Bears are ball hawks back there. He's better than everybody else they've had this year. I don't know that that's great, but he's better than everybody else.
I'm going to take the Browns, and this is low-key been Kevin Stefanski's probably best coaching year. If the Texans don't make the playoffs, I could see him sneaking into Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I'm going Browns as well.
I mean, your two best offensive players
doesn't get any respect in the Coach
of
the Year.
I mean, not just your best running back who's been gone all year, but they really haven't gotten anything out of Watson. And they pulled Joe Flacco up off his couch, and they're, tied for the second and third best record in the AFC. Next up, the 5-8 New York Giants at the 6-7 New Orleans Saints. This actually has surprising playoff implications for both teams. Dennis, we know that we are playing Saquon Barkley. He's a great option at running back. Is there any other Giant that catches your eye?
Probably just DeVito and Superflex. I mean, a lot of leagues we're at the point where you can't trade. I still have several leagues where you can trade, but most leagues, if it's a redraft league, you most certainly can't trade. Dynasty leagues, you're still be able to make some trades. The Saints give up some production to mobile quarterbacks, but Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, those are all lottery tickets. If I wouldn't expect them guys to be in the starting lineup unless it's a 14 or 16 teamer, or you start, 12 or 13 guys.
Or you're in the toilet bowl and you just want to YOLO it. For the Saints, you're starting Kamara. You're
in our league.
No, that wasn't specific to you. We have Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, who you're playing. We have not seen a very robust passing game with Derek Carr, who went into the fourth quarter last week with just 37 passing yards. Is there any other Saint you would want to trust in a crucial playoff week?
So nobody else took any pass attempts either. So it isn't like they were bringing Winston in to throw deep or Taysom Hill running plays and making some throws. So they only threw the ball 26 times. Wasn't great. He did get 2 touchdowns. He's RB5, and that's with missing the first 3 games of the season. So he's
been a beast.
He's a plug and play, and he may win some people some titles. Olave's wide receiver 17. He hasn't taken the step that we wanted based on his rookie season. And I blame Derek Carr.
I was going to say, I don't know that's his fault.
But they really haven't been able to get anything else going consistently. Mike Thomas had a couple games. Rashid Shaheed has had a couple games. Juwan Johnson had a game. It just is nobody. Foster Moreau had a game. Other than, Taysom Hill maybe, and he was out last week. So Jamal Williams hasn't done squat this year. It's tough to start anybody else.
I love that Kendre Miller pick. We haven't even seen him play, really. I am taking the Saints.
I'm going to go the Giants. I hadn't picked yet, but because I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, I thought I'd wait. I'm taking Tommy Cutlets.
NFC battle, the 6-7 Atlanta Falcons at the 1-12 Carolina Panthers. Last week, the Falcons exploded in the passing game, 374 yards for Desmond Ridder. Do you think he can do it again?
So theoretically, I think he can. The challenge, though, is that the Panthers, they give up the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks because they give up so many fantasy points to running backs. And you've got Bijan.
The Falcons might just win the wishbone at this point in time.
Right. So between Robinson and Algier, it wouldn't surprise me if Ridder only throws the ball 23 times, 25 times, and they still run 60 plays, but Robinson gets 20 carries and Algier gets 20 carries. And
this is the Cordero Patterson game.
Yeah. So They give up the third most fantasy points to running backs, the fourth most rush yards, and the most rushing TDs. It is a Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier game if ever there was one.
Nobody
You know
tell
what we're going to
Arthur
be treated
Smith
to?
it's
2 end-arounds to Jonnu Smith that go for touchdowns. That's what we're going to do.
No one tell Arthur Smith it's the fantasy playoffs, please. Meanwhile, for Carolina, they've gotten their running game going, but passing has still been a work in progress. The Falcons have actually gotten a little better secondary. Thielen was hot to start the season, but he's kind of come back to the pack. They're targeting Mingo a lot, but not getting a lot of production. Is there a Panthers receiver you would want in this crucial week?
It's hard to start one in fantasy, but I think if you do, it's got to be Mingo. And you're starting him in a flex. He's got 31 targets over the last 4 games. They're just not converting. Part of the reason is Bryce Young has the 5th highest off-target throw rate in the NFL. So we'd like to think Mingo's getting open because they're peppering him with targets, but they're just not getting the ball where he can catch it. The Panthers give up the 4th most sacks. They have 51 sacks they've given up so far. I'm starting to wonder what's going to damage Bryce Young more, sitting him the rest of the season for Andy Dalton or just letting him get his ass handed to him game after game after game.
Well, I mean, they don't have a real permanent coach in there because there's no chance that their interim's staying. So I think that's a question somebody who is going to be a long-term coach would probably ask themselves. But we saw that happen with Trevor Lawrence in his rookie year too. He just kept getting, and we thought his confidence was destroyed. And seeing what happened and his bounce back with Doug Peterson, I'm not giving up hope yet. If they get the right guy in there, and that feels like a big if with David Tepper. But
so in Dynasty, what would you trade right now for Bryce Young?
If I had Bryce Young, I'm still not giving him up for less than a first. But if I'm trying to get him, I might try to see if I can get a second, because you're trying to get him in Superflex. If you're on one quarterback, I don't know that unless my situation is abhorrent, I don't know that that's a big focus for me.
So would you give, if you felt like you were the first or second best team in the league in a Superflex league, would you give up your first?
Maybe, because especially a lot of times those teams are rolling with veterans. So I made kind of a move like that last year. I had a Superflex team where my best quarterback was Tom Brady, and I knew and so I gave my low end to get Kenny Pickett because I thought at least he's a starter. I also drafted Bryce Young in that league, so I'm starting over. This is what I'm telling you. And hoping that Bryce Young gets a better coach.
Yeah.
I am taking the Falcons. Yeah. Next up, the Washington Commanders 4-9 at the 6-7 Los Angeles Rams. Dennis, Sam Howell has been a top 12 QB most of the season, but he only had 127 yards and an interception in his last game. A couple rushing touchdowns kind of bailed him out. How are you feeling about him this week?
So Howell actually sits at QB6 on the year, and the Rams do give up production to fantasy quarterbacks. So this feels very much like a 2 touchdown, 2 interception, 4 sack, and maybe a rushing touchdown game that bails Howell out. Maybe not a super high passing yardage, though. I mean, Terry McLaurin has been one of the most disappointing fantasy assets this year.
Well, Washington's other problem is they can't block, and the Rams still have Aaron Donald.
They still do have Aaron Donald, so I think Howell will make a couple plays, and he's tough. He takes a knocking and keeps on rocking, and I like him. I think it's going to be probably a fairly close game. Nah, I take that back. If the Rams are on, it's not going to be close if that offense is clicking.
Speaking of the Rams, 30-plus points in each of his last 2 games. Matthew Stafford is catching fire at the right time. Is he a QB1 this week?
I mean, Fantasy Pros has him ranked as quarterback 7. So, the Commanders
I have
give up
in there too.
The second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Commanders certainly, are susceptible. And if we remember correctly, what was it, about 4 weeks ago, they traded away their two best pass rushers?
Yeah.
I think we could see Puka and Kupp both finish as wide receiver ones this week.
Hickey's tracking to be back too. You might even see a nice game for him. And Kyron Williams is known to catch a few passes. So I like the Rams a lot in this one.
So do I.
Next up, the 10-3 San Francisco 49ers at the 3-10 Arizona Cardinals. Last week, all 5 of the 49ers big players delivered in fantasy. Can they do it again against a not so great Arizona team?
I mean, it's a division game, so anything can happen. But this should be another blowout. McCaffrey's going to get it. I think the real question is, how soon do the 49ers kind of pull it back and start grinding it out with Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis-Price? I think Elijah Mitchell is out again. It's a game they should win it handily. Wouldn't surprise me if they score a defensive touchdown and a special teams touchdown to go with several offensive touchdowns.
For the Cardinals, Trey McBride's already up to tight end 10 on the season. Is he starting to become a set it and forget it option at a tough position?
He is, but San Francisco has some of the best coverage linebackers in the league, and Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. They give up the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends. But since week 6, McBride is tight end 6, and Kyler Murray doesn't hesitate to throw him the ball. I feel like it's going to be a tough road to hoe. I think you still start McBride. I think he's top 12 this week still, but I don't necessarily expect him to have a huge game.
I am taking the 49ers.
Be silly not to.
Next up, 10-3 Dallas Cowboys at the 7-6 Buffalo Bills. Dennis, on Tuesday, you kind of talked about how the Cowboys are a real top-heavy fantasy option. You like Dak and Lamb and Ferguson and Pollard. Anyone else that catches your eye?
So Dak's QB3, Lamb is wide receiver 2, Ferguson is tight end 8, and Pollard is RB 10. Those guys, you're pretty much starting no matter what now. Michael Gallup is wide receiver 64. He's only scored double digits in 4 games, and it's hard to trust. Brandon Cooks is a little bit better. He's been wide receiver 19 since the Cowboys bye week. So I think he's somebody you can plug into your flex. Rico Dowdle, he's wide RB 32 over the last 5 weeks. As they've kind of hit that point in the season where they're using Dowdle a little bit more like they used Zeke over the last couple of years, and that's really helped. Dowdle is not extremely productive, but it's helped Tony Pollard's production. So the short answer is just Cooks.
For the Bills, Josh Allen's QB1. He's been lighting it up. But in the passing game, while Stephon Diggs is wide receiver 6 on the season, his last 4 games have gone like this: 6.4 points, 6.7 points, 19.4 points, and 6.4 points. We've talked about the inconsistent nature of Shakir and Gabe Davis, Dalton Kincaid, and Dawson Knox vying for targets. Are you feeling real set about any of them right now?
You have to start Diggs because of where you've drafted him most likely, or what you spent to acquire him, and where he sits in your depth chart. He's wide receiver 28 since week 8. I mean, that's a wide receiver 3. I feel like they're going to get back on track, but they're going up against a very, very stout Dallas defense, and Dallas can make plays even with Trayvon Diggs out. Who's the cat? Micah Parsons gets after it. They
still have Stephon Gilmore and Deron Bland back there at corner, so they're no slouches.
They have been playing really, really well. It's hard to trust Gabe Davis in the last 8 weeks. Here's what Gabe Davis has done: 1.6, 23.7, 0, 9.6, 0, 22.5, bye week, 0. It's like this.
It's a few too many zeros in there for me.
But if you look at the trends, this should be a double-digit week, fairly high double-digit. It should be a 20-pointer. I don't know.
We will see. I think it's going to be a little bit of a letdown for Dallas after Philly week. I'm taking the Bills.
I'm going with the Cowboys.
This is the second game this week. The probably 4 NFL teams I like the best are the Broncos, Lions, Bills, and Cowboys, and they're playing each other this week. And I don't know that I can watch that Bills Cowboys game because I'll be rooting for both of them. Although it might be a nice change of pace from most of the afternoon games where I'm like, can both these teams lose? Next up, Sunday Night Football, Baltimore Ravens 10-3 at the 8-5 Jacksonville Jaguars. Dennis, Keaton Mitchell seems to be taking over the lion's share of the work in the backfield. How are you feeling about him for fantasy?
I feel pretty good. He's getting the most touches. He's the most explosive back. The Jags give up the most receptions to running backs in the NFL. So, well, I get that the Ravens don't pass the ball that much to their running backs. Mitchell is explosive enough that I don't think he needs to get 6 or 7 or 8 targets. So if he can get 4, maybe 5 targets, I feel like he can do something with it. And Gus is still going to get the short area work. Really, it's Justice Hill is who I wish they would kind of do away with. Because if it's split in 2 ways and you know what the roles are, it's kind of it's good for fantasy. You can depend on it. But when it's split 3 ways and you have overlapping roles, that gets frustrating.
Plus, Lamar is known to run the ball from time to time as well. For the Jaguars, on Tuesday, you kind of chronicled the struggles of Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones the last couple of weeks. How are you feeling about them? And how are you feeling about Parker Washington? We've seen him step in for Kirk. He's had touchdowns in back-to-back games.
So he had 3 targets and 2 catches. If it wasn't for the touchdown, would we even be talking about him?
Jimmy Graham's had touchdowns in back-to-back games too. You should just be glad I didn't work him into the lineup.
I can't go there yet. Could he be one of the guys next year? Sure. Could he earn more targets? He wasn't an elite prospect, and he didn't become an elite prospect. He's not going to be a target earner at a high rate. He's going to get lucky. He's going to catch a touchdown here and there. He's got decent size. He's built like a running back. I think he's like 5'10", 210. He's built like a running back. He's going to be great in the slot. Really, if I'm the Ravens, or the Jaguars, what I want Zay Jones to stay healthy so that I'm not tempted to put Calvin Ridley out there in that Z or X or wherever it is, whichever one of those alphabet positions that Calvin Ridley is just not good at.
Yeah, I've seen some people victory lapping their preseason love of Parker Washington after the last 2 weeks. We'll see what he does. I am taking the Ravens. I think Baltimore's going to end up the top seed in the AFC.
I think that's where we're headed as well. I'm taking the Ravens.
Final game of the week is Monday Night Football. The 10-3 Philadelphia Eagles at the 6-7 Seattle Seahawks. Dennis, you talked a little bit on Tuesday about the injury to Jalen Hurts and how it's changed the running game. We haven't seen as much dynamic play from DeAndre Swift the last couple of weeks. Could really use him this week. How are you feeling?
So he's RB17, but he's only had 1 double-digit game in the last 5. The targets haven't been consistent for him. So it's been tough. Now, the other side of the coin is the Seahawks give up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs. They also give up the 3rd most rushing TDs to running backs. But then when they get close enough for a running back to rush it in, Jalen Hurts just takes it. So basically, it's crazy that they'll give DeAndre Swift 1 chance, and if he doesn't get in, then it's the brotherly shove. So I like Swift's talent, but it just, they're just not getting it done over the past 5 weeks because they haven't played as well as a team.
I mean, you got to do that shove before they outlaw it, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, for the Seahawks, Geno Smith's still questionable. They are kind of on the ragged edge of getting pushed out of playoff contention. So I think if there's any possibility he will play, but you need to keep an eye on that since it's Monday night. But I want to ask you about the backfield. We saw both backs back in action last week. Neither of them is on the injury report, but neither of them was a great producer. It wasn't a great matchup with the 49ers. Do you think it could be better this week?
It could be. I mean, Charbonnet averaged 4.9 yards a carry on 9 carries. Walker was 2.6 on 8. It's another frustrating backfield. It feels like if either one of these guys could get 65% of the touches, it would be great for fantasy because we've seen both of them perform well when they have that amount. Probably the bigger concern is that whenever Walker gets that volume, he just gets injured. And, it's like, I don't know, did Rashad Penny touch him before he left town last year? I don't know.
He got Rashad Penny's locker.
Yeah, something.
I am taking the Eagles.
I'm taking the Eagles as well.
Well, that'll do it for this week. Week 15 should be a big one. If you have a playoff matchup out there or a playoff matchup or two, best of luck out there. Hope your players come through for you. If people are looking for a way to bide the time until games begin in earnest on Saturday this week, Dennis, what can they do?
Well, you got to check those lineups because of the Saturday stuff. It's, I got to be honest, though, if we could get a couple games on Friday and we just have games Thursday to Monday, that would be great. I would love that. My wife would hate it, but I would love it.
Well, we do have games on 3 consecutive weekend days, which I thought was pretty nice.
I agree.
Josh Jacobs officially inactive.
Officially inactive. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was checking for everyone.
What I need each of you listeners to do for us for the holiday season is go to your friends and have one of your friends go to their favorite podcast platform, subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating. They don't have to listen, just subscribe so it downloads. That's sufficient. But if you've listened, you've probably won some. So give them that encouragement. Then plug us into your ears. We got a lot of great off-season content coming up as well.
Keenan Allen is officially inactive, but so too is Donald Parham, and I know that one cuts you deep, Dennis.
I'm going to keep him on my rosters, and with the understanding that, we'll always have that one game.
I'm guessing he's out for injury because they said he was questionable with a shoulder injury. So going to be exciting. Devontae Adams was not inactive. There was some concern that he might also miss, which you might have seen me really quickly change my prediction. If there's no Adams and no Jacobs, I can't in good conscience pick the Raiders. I'm not picking them in good conscience anyway. I'd really like both teams to lose tonight, but I'm going to stick with the Raiders. I am bummed for my Scott Fishbowl team. It makes it much harder to advance without Josh Jacobs.
Well,
I hope Jaden Reed plays.
I didn't make the playoffs in Scott Fish, so I don't have that trouble.
It's always next year.
Thanks,
Well, that'll do it for us. That'll do it for us tonight. You enjoy week 15 and your 3-day football bonanza.